Hello everybody, it's Gibi, but you'll only see me for the very beginning of this video because today I give the reins to my beloved editor, Vest. Vest has been editing my videos for years now, I think like 6 years. We met when he sent me a very professional email. If you ever wanted to edit for a YouTuber, I highly recommend learning very basic email skills. You would be surprised how few of those we get. I really was looking for an editor at the time. It's funny because I went to school for editing and it was the very first thing that I wanted to hire out. Having your own editor is a huge step in doing content full time, and Vest has really grown with me, with this channel, and has been here for all of the milestones. So this video is actually really long overdue. We do not gatekeep here, okay? We share everything that we know, so hopefully this will be very informative to the small group of you that I think this will be very helpful and enlightening to, or it will just be very relaxing because I previewed this and I was feeling it. So give a very warm welcome to Sean, aka Vestman, aka Vestman the Best Man. And we'll have all the timestamps in the description box. Feel free to pop any questions at all in the comments. He's very good at answering those. You can also find him on Twitter. So, without further ado, if you are ever wondering about the nitty-gritty, what goes into editing one of my ASMR videos, here you are. Thanks, Vest. Enjoy.
Hello everyone, Sean here, and that was my poor attempt at trying to do some finger fluttering, but with that said, welcome to what is going to be a very different Gibi ASMR video as we take a look from an editing technical perspective of what it's like to create one of her videos, going from when I receive the files to when they end up on YouTube for you to enjoy. But before we get there, I'm going to kind of detour a few times along the way to talk about software I use, some things that might help you if you do create ASMR, some of the equipment involved in the process. But before we get into any of that, let me kind of go over who I am, because there's probably a lot of people who clicked into this video wanting their weekly dose of GB ASMR content and find me here instead. So my name is Sean, or Vest as GB calls me in the videos, and I have been her longtime ASMR editor, going all the way back to this video right here, which I believe is the first one on the channel with my name on it. I'm not 100% sure if it's the first video I did. I think there were some Patreon videos around that time, but suffice it to say it was right around that time that I started editing for GB, and that kind of leads into, well, how did you meet GB? Well, I was, like most people, just a fan of the content. Very early on, I remember seeing the first video of hers I saw was her first Raven video. I don't know specifically how, if maybe I was looking up Teen Titans stuff that day or something. The algorithm did its thing. I ended up on that video. I followed her for some time, and when I decided to further pursue editing from my previous work, I reached out to her, asked if she needed any assistance, if she needed an editor, linked off to a few of the different things I did, and the rest is history, because here we are several hundred ASMR videos later. So with that said, a probably lesser known fact is that I'm also a big voice of change for the different technology that GB has used over the years. The cameras, for example, GB just switched to the Sony ecosystem, but also computers that she has picked up or mixers that she has used. I just love technology. I love reading about it. I love researching all the, the latest new things coming out. So anytime I see something that I think she might like or that would be beneficial to the channel, I usually link it off to her, explain why, etc., etc. So with that little history lesson behind us, I think it's also a great jumping off point to talk about the technology we're currently using. And one thing you'll quickly notice is that as part of me suggesting what things for her to try out and to use, is I also tend to get them myself. So I have recently suggested, and she did switch to the Sony ecosystem of cameras because I'm also using a Sony camera, and the autofocus on them is simply unparalleled when it comes to ASMR, in my opinion, of course. They have a very fast, very accurate autofocus system, and while it might not be what you want in all scenarios, for ASMR where you're oftentimes moving around, where you're oftentimes lifting stuff up in front of your face and you want that quick snap focus to the object and then quickly back to you, I don't think a Sony camera can be beat right now. So for microphones, she's using her AKG mics. You've seen them on the channel for some time, and they are now feeding into the Rodecaster Pro 2, which is her new mixer that I suggested after following it myself and loving it so much. The main reason for that is that the Rodecaster Pro 2 has very strong preamps, so those are the devices that power your microphones. And they are both very strong in that they can pretty much power any microphone with ease, very clearly, very loudly if you need them to, but they also do so in a way that's going to introduce almost no background noise, no hissing, no electrical noise, things that you just generally wouldn't want in ASMR. So that is her setup on her end: Sony cameras, AKG mics, Rodecaster Pro 2 mixer. And then on my end, when it comes to the editing, it's pretty much all done in the Adobe suite, but there are some other things along the way that have been added. Adobe Audition and Premiere are where I spend most of my time, but I also use iZotope RX10 audio editor. iZotope has multiple pieces of software under its name, but the RX10 audio editor has an extremely good denoising algorithm, so I use that a lot of the times to get the audio as clean as I possibly can, and I'll go into that a bit more deeply when we're actually looking at the timeline to kind of explain that process. Within Premiere, you can also have things called plugins, and I have way too many of those. I have the Boris effects suite of plugins. I believe that also comes with a bunch of Sapphire ones too, if I'm not mistaken. I have some new blue elements, so on and so forth. They give me just a wide breadth of options of things that I can do. Namely, use them during the green screen videos, but you sometimes see them pop up here and there in other videos as well. Along with all that, I also subscribe to websites to have access to stock pieces of audio and video, special effects, so on and so forth. The main website that I use is Motion Array. They just have the best selection, not necessarily the most in any one category, but they have the best selection of every category. So you'll see backgrounds sometimes pulled from there, or sound effects pulled from there, or special effects, so on and so forth. I think the most recent video that you've seen with one of those was the most recent Daisy video. If you remember the intro of that video, there's a misting effect that comes in. That was from Motion Array, so thank you, Motion Array, for that. With that said, I understand that software isn't the most accessible, and if you're just starting out, you don't want to spend a bunch of money on software you may not want to keep in the long run. So instead, I would recommend two things. Audacity for your audio. It's a great piece of audio software. You can use it to record your mics. You can do some basic editing in it, and it's just all around a very useful tool to get the highest quality possible out of your microphones. And for video, it's DaVinci Resolve. Resolve is hands down the best free video editor out there. It's competitive with all the paid ones. You can use it in place of Premiere or Sony Vegas. But on top of that, Resolve has one of, if not the best color grading tools in it, but also one of, and probably the best, ultra key or green screening tools in any piece of software I've ever seen. So much so that even years later, I still use DaVinci Resolve to do a lot of green screen work, specifically because it is so good, it is so strong, and you just really can't go wrong. If there is any one downside to Resolve, is that its editing environment is so unique to it that when you do switch to another one, you can find it very jarring. Adobe Premiere, Final Cut, Sony Vegas, they are all very similar in their general look and in the general kind of timeline of how you edit a video. Resolve is more unique, so the transition to Resolve can be jarring and the transition out of Resolve can be jarring, but for the high price of $0, you just really can't go wrong. So if you are starting out and you wanted a piece of software to kind of dip your toes into editing for the first time, DaVinci Resolve is where it's at, and use Audacity as your audio recorder to get the absolute best possible audio quality that you can. So with that introductory stuff out of the way, let's kind of switch things up. I'm going to get really small, hop down in the corner, we'll pull up some stuff, and we'll start going through the Gibi editing process. And of course, as we're going along, I'm going to continue to kind of give tips and tricks so that people who are also creating their own ASMR or content in general can kind of come away with hopefully some new ideas of both how to make their own stuff and how Gibi does her stuff. So let's hop on over to Adobe Premiere and we'll get started with that. Future Sean here with a quick little insert because I want to touch on something that I think is very important to the editing experience that I didn't really get to in the rest of the video, but I wanted to kind of front load it because I do think it is very important and applies to everything else I'm about to say. And it's the idea that the editing experience is very subjective to each individual, and then the viewing experience is also very subjective to each individual. And by that I just mean we literally have, the limits of our vision and the limits of our hearing, and each person has unique vision. We don't all see the same colors the same way. We don't all hear things the same way. And that's also then further amplified by the different headphones we all wear, the different monitors we all view things through. So we have these kind of two things changing and altering the experience of what the original files, what the original video and what the original audio was. And it's very important to be aware of that, to be cognizant of that, especially while you're editing, because if you edit based on what your sole viewing experience is, then that's going to be, maybe it sounds great to you, you've edited it in a way that's great to you, but that might not be great to the next person down the line because maybe they perceive colors differently, or maybe their hearing is different than yours, so what sounded correct for you doesn't sound correct for them. So to counter that, I really, really encourage you to not necessarily go out and buy the most expensive headphones, the most expensive monitors, but to just use the tools within the software. All the audio programs, all the video programs, all the editing software, they have meters, they have gauges, they have graphs and scopes, all these things that are not subjective. They are 100% objective. They cannot be altered by you, the human. They cannot be altered by the random hardware that is involved in the situation. They are reading that raw base file and giving you a graph to help you edit in a way that is unbiased by those things I mentioned. All right, so we are down in the corner. We're hanging out. We're going to have a good time talking about extremely technical editing processes involved in making a Gibi ASMR video. So let's not waste any more time. Let's just jump into it. Step 1, Gibi's recorded the video. Let's assume she's done that. She sent me the files. We used to use Google Drive. We've moved on to a new system now, but Google Drive for most people is going to be just fine. It can be a little finicky at times, but generally speaking, it's pretty handy. So if you're looking for a recommendation, Google Drive definitely it's going to get the job done. But I've received the files. What do I do? What's the first step? Do I open Premiere? No, not a chance. We're so far away from Premiere still. We got 10 other steps before we get there. The actual first thing I have to do is open up Adobe Audition, and you can see that on your screen right now. Why do I have to do that? Well, as you know, we have in ASMR the ear-to-ear sound, and for Gibi's setup in particular, we like to have multi-track recording active pretty much all the time. And what that means is that each ear, one ear, the other ear, are recorded to different audio files. The reason for this is it gives us greater control over the end product. If you have, say, multiple people on a scene and each one is mic'd up with their own mic, I can now independently control each person, makes things much easier. If it's a video where maybe there's one mic on Gibi, one mic on the table or on the sound being generated, I can control those much easier. But for a lot of the videos where it's just Gibi doing a role play, or if it's just Gibi doing, she's just standing there talking, making sounds, yada yada, then we don't necessarily need that independent control. So what I have to do is I bring the audio into Audition, and we're going to merge the multi-track files into one track. So it's a pretty simple process. I've already set it up, but I'll quickly go through. You go to New Multi-Track Session, boom, bam. In our case, we're 48,000 kilohertz. We put that multi-track session together, and you can kind of see that over here, 48,000 kilohertz, the duration, the bit rate, 32-bit float. But once we've got the session set up, we have to import the audio. So in this case, I'm using the Daisy video from a couple weeks ago as a kind of a test example. And the only thing actually in this step that we need to do is merge the audio together. So we put one track on top, so left ear, right ear, left ear, right ear, and we have to then make sure they are set to left ear, right ear. So that's pretty simple. We just move one all the way to left 100 and right 100. And that's it. As simple as that. We now have the distinct left ear, right ear sound coming through, and we would just export this as one singular audio track. Generally speaking, we use waves. I highly suggest, if you're recording your audio, to get away from using MP3s, using a .wav file. You're going to get much higher quality audio. It's a uncompressed, or as uncompressed as you can get, audio format other than like strictly lossless. I won't go down that rabbit hole, but just trust me, if you have the option to record in .wav, I would highly suggest you use that over MP3 and other similar files. But we have a file that we are now ready to use in the ASMR video. Do we go to Premiere yet? No, of course not. The next step is to go to iZotope. All right, so now we've moved over to iZotope. This is RX10, the audio editor. iZotope is a suite of software. There's plugins, there's pieces of software, but this is RX10 specifically. And one thing I do want to point out that with any of these pieces of software that I might bring up or plugins I might show is that I pretty much never paid full price for them. I know they can get very expensive, so I highly suggest, tip number one of this portion of the video, I suppose, is that if you're looking at these pieces of software, if you see something online that you think might really help you, but it's pretty expensive right now, just wait a little bit. A lot of this stuff goes on sale very, very frequently, and it doesn't take too long to be able to pick the thing up you want at 25, 50, even 70. I think it was 70% off when I bought the iZotope suite, for example. I don't know that I've, like I said, ever paid full price for any of the plugins or plans that I use, except maybe the Adobe suite, but that's just because Adobe doesn't believe in sales. So, what can you do there? But anyways, this is iZotope, and we've taken the Daisy audio from earlier, and we've imported it into iZotope. And our first goal in iZotope is to lift the gain a little bit. Gibi's voice, at least in this instance, is a little quiet. And how do I know that? Well, while listening, if you watch down here near the bottom, you will see the audio levels. And you will see that it is falling. I accidentally clicked incorrectly and it jumped ahead. But if you watch at the bottom here, you can see that her voice is kind of falling in the low 20s, almost the 30s. And we want to aim for closer to the teens. I usually use -15 to -12 is kind of what I'm shooting for. So if we're that low, we need to come up a little bit. So we come over here, we go to gain. Gonna probably add maybe 10. Well, we'll do 9 because apparently that's what I landed on. And we'll see where that gets us.
I'll go ahead and put this with your things.
Okay, that's good enough for now. I'll probably lift it a little more once we get into Premiere, but that is sufficient for now. The next step will be to clean up the audio, but before I do that, you're probably even wondering, what are all these colors? What are we even looking at? Well, this is, like I said, this is the RX10 audio editor. That's the software, but specifically what we're looking at is called a spectral graph. It is a visual representation of the intensity or the volume of sound as measured on the Hertz scale. So the Hertz scale is this set of numbers on the right side. It starts at 0 in the middle, 20,000 at the top, and every sound that exists in the universe can fall on this Hertz scale somewhere. And it is, like I said, it's a measurement of the intensity of it represented by these colors. So the brighter something is, the louder it is, and then you can then measure that loudness where it falls on the Hertz scale. So if we take this portion of voice and we have this very bright portion right here, this one right here, we can see that it starts just above 100 Hertz and it ends around 400 Hertz. And that is just a portion of the Daisy voice. If we listen to this again.
I'll go ahead and put this with your things.
So that is Daisy talking, and this little bit that I highlighted, that's not her full voice. That is a portion of the voice. That is just one little portion. You can see the full voice is represented by all these different bars. And we have, everyone's voice is going to have a very similar look. They're going to have these different bars to their voice, which represents the different tones, the different hertz sounds that your voice makes to comprise whatever your voice sounds like. In Daisy's case, you can see we have, I would say there's maybe 3 to 4 major lines that kind of represent the main portion of her voice, and then some other ones that kind of fall off. But the most important one is this lowest one, which starts, it kind of moves around a little bit as Daisy's inflection changes, but you can see it starts around, generally, let's use this as a nice middle ground. We can see it starts generally around 200, and sometimes with the right inflection is peaking all the way up to about 400. So the reason why I'm focusing so much on this is because the spectrograph, because the hertz range and all that, how that all comes together, once you start to understand that, you can really start to break down sounds into very specific little pieces like this and really start to understand the good parts of the sound, the bad parts of the sound, how you can, or how your voice interacts with different sounds. And it really, really will open your eyes to editing your ASMR in a way that's going to make it so that you know exactly, you know, what sounds are going to work best with your voice, what sounds are going to work best with this other sound. For example, let's say you want to make, let's say you have a very deep voice, a very, very deep voice. Like, you know, you're like Batman out here, right? And you also want to make a very deep tapping sound at the same time. So you want to talk, you're talking, but you also want to make this tapping sound at the same time. Well, if you have a very deep voice and you're trying to make a very deep tapping sound at the same time, what'll happen is, and you'll see it on the spectrograph, is the sound and your voice are going to crisscross, right? They're going to butt heads. And one of those two sounds is going to start overlapping the other one. Usually it's going to be the tapping. And what'll happen is your voice will get harder and harder to hear because the tapping is overriding your voice. But let's say, you know, you're Batman out here and you're trying to do Batman-y things, and Batman's talking to you, but you're trying to make a higher pitch sound. Let's say you're clicking a pen or something like that. Clicking a pen is not going to be anywhere near as deep as Batman talking. So what happens is you now have the clicking of the pen and you have the voice, very unique sounds, very different on the hertz scale, and they will not interact with each other. So you will have a very clear voice sound, you'll have a very clear clicking sound, you won't have to worry about one of the two overriding each other. Now that's an example of two good sounds. You want the talking, you want the pen clicking. What happens though if you start to get bad sounds? Obviously the best example is an airplane, and fortunately we have one of those in here. So without me even having to explain too much more about the spectrograph, I bet if you look right now, you can tell me where the airplane is, can't you? Yes, it's that giant line in the middle of the screen right here. That is an airplane. And again, this is a great example of why learning to look at spectrographs, why learning to use spectrographs can be so powerful, is because you can immediately identify problems with audio. And if we go back to my previous example of Batman trying to do ASMR, very, very deep voice, and what do we see coming out of this airplane is that it's a very, very deep sound. Obviously, you know, a plane's thousands of feet in the air, and as it rumbles by, only the deepest of sounds reaches your microphones and reaches your ears. And if you got Batman voice and you're trying to do Batman ASMR, and you suddenly have this airplane rumbling above you, what's going to happen is those two things, like I mentioned before, they interact with each other, and one is going to overwrite the other. Obviously, the intensity of an airplane can sometimes be very, very loud. So poor Batman suddenly finds his ASMR voice is clipping, it's getting drowned out because you have this airplane interacting with your audio. And you can see here, this is Daisy, And Daisy's voice, like I mentioned before, starts just above where airplanes tend to fall. So if you listen...
Like that. Oh, I could put it in your ears like a little bit.
So GB starts to laugh there at the end, but what you heard is that the Daisy voice and the airplane were very distinct. Daisy's voice is starting just above, because she's whispering, it's higher pitched. Daisy's voice is above the airplane, so you can hear the airplane very distinctly, and you can hear Daisy's voice very distinctly. But again, Batman example, if that was Batman voice, Batman's trying to do his ASMR thing, you got the airplane coming in, suddenly you've got a collision. You've got a collision of sound, and that's why some ASMR artists are really going to have, they're going to struggle with airplanes. But conversely, you might have that problem with any other sound. If you have a higher pitched voice, but then you also have the whine of a computer, or you have the droning of a ceiling fan, or whatever your voice is. And this is why, again, I'm focusing so much on the spectral graph, because once you understand your personal voice and how it's being recorded, and then you understand the sounds all around you, you can start to understand very specifically the sounds that are going to complement your voice, the sounds that are going to be okay with your voice, and the sounds that are going to directly clash with your voice. But with all that said, I don't want to spend too much time on that now, because we'll kind of loop back around to it later. Step 1 was to boost the gain of this Daisy clip. The second step of the actual iZotope process is to now clean it up. So what we have to do for that is very quickly just find a spot where there's basically no sound other than the sound we want to remove. So that's pretty simple, because we have that fortunately right here. So if we quickly listen, what do we have? Okay, so there's two sounds here. One, there's a very faint but audible, kind of like a staticky hiss sound. There's also a very, very, very faint, I don't even know if it'll come through on YouTube. There's a super faint rumble. I think it's kind of leftover airplane rumbling. And then there's a third sound of a GB breathing. Well, GB breathing is mandatory to life, so we can't ask her to stop doing that. But what we can do is remove some of that rumbling and some of that hissing. So all we have to do here is we're just going to highlight a portion, and that should be long enough. We don't need very much for this, because you can see there's not a whole lot of bad audio here to begin with. We just want to remove a tiny portion. We'll go over to Spectral Denoise. Again, this is a spectral graph, so we're going to use the Spectral Denoiser. It makes sense. And this is what it looks like. And we're just going to hit Learn, and that's going to learn the sound profile of the portion we clipped. And again, we're just clipping a tiny piece, because we just want to get this little bit of hissing, this little bit of fuzz, and a little bit of rumble. And I've got this pretty much on the default settings, other than I've turned it up to the best possible algorithmic quality. The reduction actually is down a little bit. We're going to bring this up. I think default's 10. We don't necessarily need a 10 decibel denoise here. This isn't that loud. So I'm actually just going to type it in, because I apparently can't get to 8. But we're going to do 8. And then the final step here is to make sure we do the entire audio track. So we select it, and you can't see it because it's off screen, but there we go. And now we're running the denoiser. This is going to apparently take roughly 4 minutes. So I'll see you in 4 minutes. All right, so the spectral denoiser is complete, and you can see real quick, if I flip back and forth, this is what it looked like before. This is what the audio file looks like now, and you can see it's removed all that low-end humming, staticky sound that we don't want. But if we listen to the audio,
I do have a lot of tension.
That's what it sounds like after being processed. And if we go back,
I do have a lot of tension.
Now the difference might be hard for you to hear depending on what audio equipment you're listening on, but there is a distinct lack of that hissing, of that low-end humming, rumbling sound. And that's kind of what we're going for. The denoiser, to be very clear, the denoiser is not going to remove car horns just magically and very sudden sounds. The denoising tool in this program is designed to remove consistent sounds, humming, long form buzzing, stuff of that nature. That is very easy for the denoiser to remove. But keep in mind, it's not meant to remove this sudden sound. If the sound lasts for less than a couple seconds, it's not ideally removed by the denoising tool. That's usually better removed manually. The other thing to keep in mind is you want to be very careful that you don't try to remove too much. Again, going back to what I said about sounds overlapping, is the denoiser is an automatic algorithm. So you don't really control specifically what sound that it's going to isolate and try to remove. You can push it in a direction, but you can't control specifically what sound. So if you have very noisy audio, if you just have a roaring sound in the background that you're trying to remove, or something of that nature, or there's just so much sound all the time, and you try to denoise it, you might be able to denoise it, but again, because so much of your voice is going to get overlapped by the bad sound, as you remove the bad sound, you start removing your voice as well. So keep that in mind, that these denoising tools can only do so much. They're best used for light noise removal, a couple decibels of bad noise. But if you are actively competing with a very loud sound for a very consistent amount of time, there's not really a whole lot that you will be able to do to recover that in editing. You want to try, obviously, to get the audio as quiet as you can right at the source. And you can remove just little pieces of bad sounds later on. You can't just wholesale remove like the giant roaring of a fan right beside your microphone. That's just not going to happen. But we're now done with iZotope. From here, I would just go to File and hit Render. We would have the completed audio file, and finally, we can now actually get to Premiere. So let's close down iZotope, let's jump over to Premiere, and to actually begin editing a Gibi ASMR video. All right, we have made our way from Audition into iZotope. We're finished up in iZotope. We have an audio file that's ready to go. We can finally, as you can see, make our way into Adobe Premiere Pro. We could finally actually begin what I assume most people probably thought was step one. So from here, pretty basic stuff of we have to create the project. We have to make sure all those basic settings are correct. If they're wrong, at least with Premiere Pro, when you import the files, Premiere Pro will be like, hey, your settings are incorrect for the type of file you're editing. It'll ask you to change them. So that's kind of handy, but generally speaking for Gibi stuff, it's always the same 1080p, 60 FPS, yada, yada, yada. So all the presets there have already been handled. We get the timeline. This here is the timeline down here at the bottom. We open it up. We throw the video feed on, which is the blue one. We throw the audio on, which is the green one. And from here, we do what I assume most people assume to be the standard of I sit here and I watch through the video. That part can take a very long time. It's going to depend per video and how much is involved with that video in question. And I also do multiple passes. So typically speaking, I will focus on the audio first and then I'll do the video. Obviously, there's going to be some overlap. Like if I notice a very obvious thing that needs to be taken out of the video, I'll take it out. Same with the audio. It'll get taken out. But I focus on the audio first because ASMR is such an audio-based experience. So that's what I want to get absolutely right on the first go. And then I'll come back around. I'll do the video, or at least I'll focus more specifically on the video on the second run through. Again, that doesn't mean I'm ignoring one or the other. It's just that when you sit here and you're trying to listen, it sounds silly, but when you are listening to something so intensely, it becomes very hard to be cognizant also of the video and everything else that's going on. And I would really challenge anyone to kind of sit at a computer listening to a video for multiple hours at a time where you're just intensely listening. It's surprisingly difficult. It's surprisingly difficult. So that's why I tend to do the audio, do it in one pass, pretty much by itself, only doing very minor things to the video and other aspects of the creation process. Mainly what I'm looking for when I do the audio is the noises that I want to remove. Stomach sounds, bone cracks, stuff of that nature. I'll go in, I'll chop them up, I'll remove them, I'll clean them up, bring it back into Premiere Pro and carry on. There's going to be other stuff like, do I need to add an effect? Do I need to add a limiter? Stuff like that, which I'll cover here in a second. But generally speaking, I'm looking for those bad sounds. That's my main priority. And then we'll apply effects and whatnot as we go along as well. So let's take a look real quick. we got a moment right here where I did something. There's no bad sound there, but you can see there was an audio edit. So let's go ahead and we'll chop this up. So this is what the sound should normally be like. So you can see what it is. It's basically like a swallowing sound. And that's not the most obtrusive sound in the world. It probably would have been fine to stay in the video, but because it's the only sound happening, it's also very obvious and it's very simple to remove. So let's go ahead and see what that removal process is like. So step one is we have to isolate the sound. So you can see I've made two little cuts here, several seconds behind and ahead of it. We just right click on it, go to edit clip on Audition, and boom, we are now back in Adobe Audition, although in a different view. This is the Audition version of the Spectral Graph. So you remember seeing the iZotope one? It had a lot of oranges, a lot of blues, a black background. This is the Audition version. And in here, you can very quickly see the sound is right here. And we just want to clean it up. So what we do is we make sure we're on the paintbrush setting. And we want to grab sound that is around what we want to cover up so that we can basically just pile it on top and make the bad sound disappear. So I'm just going to grab some sound from over here. Some basically dead air where she's just doing some like shuffling, ruffling through things off to the side. And we will grab this. And I'm just going to very gently kind of overlap the sound ahead of it. So you can see we have a bit of a oomph sound still here. So we're just going to go in there, smooth that out. So it's not bad. The one thing you can hear, maybe not on your end, but on my end at least, is there's a very subtle but noticeable drop right here. And what's happening, it's just because we're going from something that has a few decibels of sound to probably something that's maybe 10 or so decibels less. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab a little bit of sound here and just do one of those so that there's a bit of a gradient. And now there's a bit of a gradient to that fall off, and we have a smooth sound. Now what you can also hear, very, very, very difficult, I'm sure, to hear through the YouTube video, but you can maybe even see it. There is a very small, what sounds like the early part of swallowing is there's this little sound right here. Probably imperceptible, but I can still hear it. So what I'm just going to do is grab a bit of audio from before it, very gently cover it up, and now that's gone as well. And that's what it's like to remove the sounds. It probably doesn't look that difficult. That was a very, thankfully, easy sound to remove. Where it starts to get more complicated is if that sound had happened while she was talking or while there's something else happening. That's when you really start to have to be careful of how do you carve out just the right amount. Is it better to completely wholesale replace it? Sometimes you get lucky when someone's talking, they've said the word multiple times, and you can copy and paste the word so it's covering up. If it is, say, if Gibi's making a trigger sound, if she's tapping, sometimes I can take tapping from earlier in the video to cover up a bad portion of tapping later in the video. Sometimes you get lucky and the bad sound happens completely isolated on its own and you can just go in and remove it like we just did. The point is that each one's going to be different. You have to approach each sound differently. It takes a lot of practice to get used to doing this, but once you get a hang of it, you can start removing a lot of those stomach grumbles, bone pops, bangs. Did you hit the microphone? Taking those moments out is actually surprisingly easy. You can just go in, slice out where you hit the microphone, and usually just carry on, and you'll have no problem. So it's a learning curve, certainly, but figuring out how to do this Spectral Graph audio editing has been a really big boon for Gibi's videos and for my editing. And I definitely encourage anyone, if you really want to kind of take those next steps into audio editing, is to look into Audition or an equivalent piece of software, look at the Spectral Graphs, learn them, like I was mentioning in iZotope, learn what the hertz range means, what this whole spectrograph mapping means, and you can really come out with some pretty crazy results once you get it all down pat. But we're done with this section. Let's hop back into Premiere. I'm going to go ahead and reset this to how it looked. So let's assume we're done with our audio edit. We come back into Premiere after saving the file. The last thing we have to do is I put a little transition between the new file and the old files. The reason I do that, Premiere likes to introduce audio popping when you import a new audio file back into it. I don't know why. Premiere, please fix that, but it is what it is. So when you bring the file back in, you have those little audio pops. I found the easiest way to get rid of them is you just cut in the transition a bit. So if this is the normal transition, I'll pull it in a little bit like this and like this. I'm using I forget what this tool is called, to be honest, but I know I push N on my keyboard and it's available to me. I'm sorry, I actually genuinely forget what this is called. I think it's like the rolling, is it like the rolling cut tool or something like that? But I basically pull in where I cut the audio a bit, and then I put a constant power. And that's just to make sure that there is no audio artifacts, no popping sounds. If I don't do that, I do run the risk. Let's see, I don't know if it'll be there, but so there's no popping in this one for me to give an example, but what can happen, like I said, is there will be popping there. Constant power fixes that. So like I said, that's how we remove a bad sound we don't want. And what I do is I just do that again and again and again and again. I go through the whole video. Some videos have dozens, some videos have hundreds of times when I do that. And I really must stress at this point that you understand that this process can be very time consuming. I'm only able to do that by the nature, or do this because of the nature that, you know, Gibi's recording and I'm editing. If you don't have an editor, if you're doing it all yourself, do understand this process is very, very time consuming. There are some videos where I have spent 8 or 9 hours just on the audio. So while it is a very beneficial thing to learn, I would highly encourage people to learn and understand spectrographs and audio editing in the spectrograph space. Do understand it is very, very, very time consuming. With that said, once I've gone through the video and I've chopped out all the bits that I don't want in there, the bone pops and so on, the other thing I would have been doing during that process is adding effects. So if we click the audio file, we can see I have 3 effects and 1 alteration. So going from the top down, we have the channel volume, and I've adjusted the channel volume just a bit. The reason I've done this is because Gibi wasn't entirely level in her microphones. She was a bit louder in one than the other. So to try to bring them back towards equilibrium so that you feel like you're in the middle where, you know, Daisy's interacting with you, I adjusted one mic down just a smidge to try to equalize them a bit. The next one, swap channels, just flips them back and forth. I had the channels backwards when I originally brought it into Audition, so I just flipped them. Pretty simple. The multi-band compressor, this one, if you're not familiar with a compressor, basically what it does is you set a volume, and anytime the video goes above that volume, the compressor tries to quiet it back down. It's very, very good for when you're singing, or if you're live streaming and you suddenly scream, the compressor keeps your voice from blowing everyone's ears out. In this case, what I'm doing is, you can see I've got the compressor set. If you follow my mouse, I've got it set in a bit of a slope, so it's kind of doing one of these and then it drops off. What I'm doing here is I'm basically not trying to prevent the sound, I'm just trying to soften it a bit. Like I was mentioning earlier, Gibi's voice, Daisy's voice, there's a lot of power in it at the lower volume, or at the lower hertz range, the 200, 300 and whatnot. So what I'm doing is, by compressing those sounds just a little bit, I'm helping to keep her voice at a level where it interacts well with the other objects in the rest of the video, the sounds she's making. While this does look like a very aggressive compressor, I've got I'm halfway down the bar. I'm actually very lightly compressing. I'm only using a 4:1 ratio. So basically that means that, as the volume goes over my threshold, I'm only compressing it at a ratio of 4:1. You can have that ratio all the way up to 10:1, 20:1, so on and so forth. So 4:1 2:1, 2:1, 2:1. It's very, very little amounts of compression. Because I'm not trying to stop her voice. I'm not trying to prevent her from, having that intensity in her voice. I'm just trying to make sure that it is a natural amount, that it doesn't become overpowering, and that it stays in a range that makes sense for the rest of the video and the other sound she's making. The thing about compressors, and I do encourage people to use them in their footage, but the thing to know about using the compressor is that it's going to be very unique to your audio setup, to whatever video you're making, to your voice, and so on and so forth. If you want kind of like a one trick fix thing for your multi-band compressor, you would probably want to set it to around -16, -18 for the threshold, a ratio of probably 3:1, and a release of 200 milliseconds. And that'll be a very gentle compressor that kicks in pretty early, but doesn't really prevent a whole lot of movement, but it should slow you down enough so that you never go into clipping areas. It's a very, very gentle, very generic compressor that will just, it's not going to change your audio in any major way, but it will just keep you from maxing out or from accidentally blowing an ear out because there was something like a loud pop during your ASMR, or there was a loud click, something like that. The final effect that I have on, in this video anyways, is the denoise. And yes, this is another denoiser on top of the iZotope denoising. In this case, it's supposed to only be at 5%. I accidentally hit it earlier when I was setting some stuff up. In this case, we're only at 5%. It's a very, very, very gentle amount of denoising. I strongly suggest if you do start using a denoising tool of any type, that you have to do so very gently, but particularly this one, because this is an automatic denoiser. This is not made for ASMR, and this is kind of an overarching point to make, is a lot of these tools aren't designed to interact with very, very quiet sounds. So this denoiser, you can't turn up very high, or else you're going to start interfering with your voice and the sounds you're trying to make. 5%, we can only get away with even 5% because Daisy's voice is so prominent in the video. However, if you are whispering in the video, if it's a very quiet video, 5% might be too much and you start ruining your voice. So you have to be really, really careful. Only go in couple percent increments. 5% is probably the max I would suggest, unless you're being very, your voice is very dominating in the ASMR video. Anything above 10% and you're pretty much guaranteed to be clipping the good portions of your voice out. This is an automatic denoiser. You cannot tell it or really instruct it to what sounds you want removed. It's just guessing. So again, be very, very cautious using this. Do not set it very high. If you have a very loud background sound that you're trying to get rid of, this isn't the tool to do it. It'll help. Don't get me wrong, it'll help. But if you set it too high, you're going to absolutely affect the quality of your ASMR voice, of the ASMR sounds that you are making. So just keep that in mind. So we've gone through the video. We've removed probably dozens of sounds we don't want. We've applied some audio effects like a compressor, like a denoiser. We've done that whole process. We come back to the beginning and now we do the video. The video portion, depending on what your goal is, can be incredibly simple, and it might be as simple as just removing parts you don't want in, and that's it. That's the whole video portion. Or you're doing a green screen video and the video portion is very complicated. There's a whole array of in between there. So for most of Gibi videos, I'm going to at least do some light color grading or alteration of the color. So let's go into that really quick. We'll click on the blue one and you can see the only effect we have is a 2-layer Lumetri effect. So what I'll actually do is I'll find a spot where Daisy's looking at us. And this is the video as it appears to me in Premiere, and pretty similarly how it appears to you on YouTube. However, this is actually how it was shot. So you can see that it was a bit brighter and it was a lot more kind of neutral, let's say. And Gibi specifically asked in this, can we try to keep it a bit darker and can we try to add a bit of warmth to it? So you can see it is a bit darker. It's not crazy dark. We didn't want it pitch black. I just aimed for a bit darker and a bit, I think her specific words was cozier. So it's just a smidge darker. I kept the shadows there. I didn't remove the shadowing on her face. I kept the shadows there. I removed just a smidge of brightness overall. And then I added a bit of warmth to the scene. Warmth is just kind of a catch-all term for adding red tones, orange tones, those kind of tones into the scene. So you can kind of see that most in the background. The background, which was used to be a light gray, becomes almost a kind of a pinkish reddish hue because we're adding that warmth in. And that is done through Lumetri. Now, I'm not going to sit here and give you a breakdown of Lumetri. This video is probably already getting long, and to go through all of Lumetri, that's a whole nother video. But Lumetri is a color grading tool that I use to do the color grading in the videos. And as we jump between videos, you'll see what I mean with each one. You can see the first Lumetri I applied was simply just bringing down the total brightness of the video, and I didn't do anything else with this one. And sometimes I find it more beneficial to use multiple Lumetri tools to get to the destination that I want instead of try to do it all in one. So the first one, I just brought down the overall brightness of the video a little bit, kind of leveled some stuff out, but I didn't want to do too much with the shadows because, like we said, we wanted to keep some of that darkness. And then the second Lumetri is where the color was added, that warmth. Again, keeping the dark down. And one thing, here's a little insider knowledge for you, is if you pay close attention to the Daisy wig, the Daisy wig is a little less saturated than it ever appears, but anytime Daisy appears in a video, I make sure to make the blue of her hair as vibrant as it can be so that it really stands out in the videos. Not altering the color, but really make sure the blue, the vibrant blue, gets through to all the viewers out there. So once we're done the audio, once we've gone through the video, there's two other little quick things we have to do. We have the outro card, which we put on. It's very simple. You just put it at the end, fade it in, fade it out. That's pretty simple. And we have anything in the intro. So in this case, we had the very specific intro of, there was the faded moment where someone is talking to you, and then the steam, and then Daisy appears. But we also have the overlay card. So we have the subscribe card, and we have the now live on Spotify, which is the Spotify video card. These ones, the Spotify video cards, I have to make unique for every video because obviously it's rotating. Whereas the subscribe card, that is a pre-built one that I just throw on every video. It's a pretty long-winded answer to all of this initial question at the beginning of today's video, but that is the basics of editing a Gibi ASMR video. I use the word basics very lightly, but we've gone through the audio process, the TLDR version. We've gone through the TLDR version of the video process. At this point, all I would do is I would hit Control-M, which is to export the video. I export 1080p, 60 FPS, usually a bitrate between 20 and 25 megabytes a second, and then we put it up on YouTube. From there, we just fill in the data. I can't show you that process. I'm not going to show you specifically filling in all that stuff, but we fill in all the data, video goes live, and there you go. That's from me receiving the files to editing it to putting it up on YouTube. But what I wanted to show you to finish things off is a little bit of the insider behind the scenes stuff. So the first one I already did, it was about Daisy and specifically the wig. I changed the hair to be more vibrant, to really come through the screen so that the viewers can really appreciate the intensity of that color, because the hair color is a defining aspect of the Daisy character. But I picked out a couple other videos as well so that we can kind of see the behind the scenes of them as well. So this is a video from a bit earlier. This was all the way back in March. And this is just a more traditional, although a bit longer, GB video of talking. I think this is the mystery box, yes. So it's just her talking and going through different items. So this video is really a lot more representative of the standard process of I would get the files, I would go through the audition process, I would go through iZotope to clean up the audio in a very generalized first pass. I would lay this whole timeline out as you see before me, and I would go through doing the audio, and you can see all the audio cuts, just like in the Daisy video. bad sound, bad sound, bad sound, so on and so on. Go through that entire audio process, loop back around, do another pass going through the video, watching the video more closely, and kind of finalizing those two pieces, adding the outro card, adding any intro overlays, I believe. Yes, so there was no, I don't think there was an ad or anything in this one, so it's just the usual Spotify and please subscribe, adding those in. And again, render 1080p, 60 FPS, 20 to 25 megabit, up onto YouTube it goes. This video, one thing I do want to point out though, the kind of behind the scenes bit of this is again the color of the video. So you'll look at this video and think, oh, you know, that's how it looks on YouTube. That's how I remember this video looking. But if I turn that off, you can actually see Gibi's old camera. So this was the GH5S. Gibi's got tons of lights, but just by the nature of the settings she's currently on and how the camera decided to be today, you can see the video came out rather flat. So the colors aren't, you know, they're not very vibrant. They're not very saturated, and it's very dark. So just like you saw with the Daisy video where I darkened things and added warmth and some color to it, this one's kind of the opposite in that I'm brightening it up. Is that correct? I don't. It's more brightly now though, and again adding color, adding skin tone color to give her skin a better look. Stuff of that nature, trying to make sure that her hair is more balanced, because obviously she's got the very, very dark aspects of her hair, the very light aspects of her hair. So we're trying to balance all that as best as we can, going from what is arguably, in my opinion, a not great look to a more balanced, brighter look. And in this case, going for, again, not too bright, but bright enough that she stands out from the background, that her hair looks good, yada, yada, yada. And you can kind of see with the audio, the same sort of stuff that I was talking about before, very similar effects. We have the left channel, again, was still a bit loud, so we had to balance that. We had the multiband compressor, but this time it's a more balanced approach. There's not much of a slope, but the same general idea. And one thing that I'm going to point out specifically with this one, though, is there's also the parametric equalizer. This I have to add to a lot of Gibi's videos, and the reason for this is because she's in a fairly large room, and I'm sure a lot of ASMR creators have had to deal with this as well. But Gibi's in a fairly large room, and what that introduces is reverb. Now you can do automatic de-reverbing, but the problem with that, with a lot of the stuff that I've mentioned, is because it's automatic, it can sometimes interact negatively with other aspects of ASMR, the sounds and whatnot. So what I do is I manually come in and just de-reverb the very specific portion that I want. So if we watch
Studio.
right here as Gibi talks, you can see that there's this unusual spike right here around 200. And that's actually a perfect freeze frame, holy smokes. So you can see there's this large spike. That is a reverb spike, and it's happening because Gibi's voice is occupying that range that, like I was talking about much earlier, Gibi's voice occupies very dominantly in that range of hertz, and unfortunately, reverbing, one of the strongest bands of reverb, is also in that range. So you will get oftentimes the room tone reverb because of that, or not room tone, but room based, I guess, room effect reverb right around that same range. So Gibi's voice is being bounced across the room, it's reverberating all over, and it's reverberating at just the right frequency with just her voice that it's very dominant. So you see that little slope down because I'm just trying to bring that down. So instead of this very booming, echoey sounding, reverberating aspect to her speech, she has a very normal sounding speech, as if she's talking just a few feet away from you and not echoing around the room. You'll also notice that here, as I'm just sloping off the low end, this is sometimes referred to as a high pass, a high pass filter. But a high pass filter would be a sharp drop off, whereas I'm just gently doing it because I don't want to drop it off entirely. I'm just trying to suppress a little bit of rumble that was present. Pretty simple stuff, but that 200 hertz kind of cut that is specifically dealing with some reverb. A lot of people will encounter that, especially if you're in a large room and if you have a bit of a deeper voice. If you have a higher pitched voice, you won't encounter this as easily. But this is something that is very common, have found, and with a lot of different people, and you just very simply just cut you chop it down. You're good to go. Moving on to the next video. This one, I think a lot of people will be interested in. I'm not really going to get into all the effects involved because, frankly, there weren't that many. We've kind of covered them at this point. But just to show you the behind the scenes, I saw a lot of people commenting on how well they liked the merging of this. And it's literally just Gibi filmed 3 separate scenes, and it was up to me to merge them. So if I start canceling or shutting off some of the tracks, you can see there goes one Gibi, and boom, there goes the other Gibi, and the central Gibi was the underlying one in this case. But if we go the other way, you can kind of see how they've all been chopped up. So all you're doing here is a system called masking. So I took the central Gibi as the main one, and then I masked the other 2 into position, and then the tricky part is lining them up so perfectly that you don't notice that there has been the mask or that there is the cut. Now, there are a few spots, as the person who edited, I can tell you there are a few spots to look, especially if you want to follow my mouse right here, that kind of gives it away. And I think Gibi tweeted it out that while she was filming this, she accidentally knocked the camera a couple times. So the camera, unfortunately, between these takes was not exactly the same, which is what you would normally want. You want the camera as stationary as possible for these. But that was not the case. So what I ended up doing is I scaled up the images a bit. So I think central Gibi, yeah, she's 5% larger than normal. And some of the other ones, I think it depends on, 7%, 10%. So I scaled them up, and by scaling them up, what that lets me do is I can shift one image up a little bit, I can shift one image down a little bit, and try to line them up. And I also masked them in such a way so that the mask or the cutting of the image happened in spots that wasn't very noticeable, I guess I would say. I tried to do it in areas where it wasn't going to intersect with too many objects, stuff of that nature. But I just thought this would be a fun little behind the scenes of that's how this is done. It's just 3 recorded videos, and you basically crop or mask the videos on top of each other until you get them just right. And I'll be honest, it probably took me maybe 2 to 3 hours to get the videos just right, of finessing them. I had to change them. One thing you don't really notice throughout the scenes, but if you scrub through it really quickly, you can see that the background is changing, because about halfway through the video is unfortunately when Gibi had knocked the camera again. So about halfway through, I have to readjust everything very slightly. In the end, we got to a spot where I was pretty happy with it. And I think, hopefully, most of the people that watched it never even saw those cuts. The last video, I think, will be the most interesting for everyone. So let me find... there we go. So this video, this is one of the most recent in-depth green screen videos that we have done. So if you want to take a look at what it looks like without any of the effects. So that's the video. This is what the video would normally look like. His Gibi's just on a green screen as Tatyana. And from the audio perspective, there is not too much different here. I believe there was... no, there wasn't even any additional sounds added. So this was just Tatyana. We have the reason why you might see 2 audio tracks is because we have the audio track, and then I rendered the audio track and reinserted it so that I would have a cleaner looking timeline. It's just something that I did to try to kind of help myself in the moment. You can see, again, a lot of the same audio things that I've talked about, a lot of the edits to clean up sounds. What effects did we use in this one? We have the multiband compressor, we have the denoiser. We didn't have to balance the channel volumes, we didn't have to do too much else there. But really it just came down, obviously for a green screen video, to the green screen. So the green screen tool that I used in this case was not DaVinci Resolve. I used the Boris Chroma Key Studio, and you can see I got to what I thought was a very good result. Basically what you do is you put the top layer of the video, and then underneath of it is you put the background. So if I shut that off, she's just on black. I'm not going to go into a lot of green screen etiquette here, but just know that it's not about how bright your green screen is, it's about how even it is. So just keep that in mind. Point number 2, you should light your green screen separately from your person. You should have your own lights, the green screen should have its own lights. Try to make those as different and distinct lights as you can. And again, the green screen, the goal is not to be bright, it is to be even. So the more even you can make it, the better. So if we turn it back on, you can see we got it pretty close. I was really, really satisfied with this. Obviously, green screens work best. Having long hair can make it difficult. Having curly hair can make it difficult. So one thing I specifically told GB, I think it was coming into this video, was to try to keep your hair down, because what will often happen with the wigs is there's like little flyaways and stuff, and that can really start to cause fuzziness around the edges. So I think she did something to try to keep the hair down, hairspray or something perhaps, and it really did help. You can see the edges are very, very clean in this one. You'll also notice, if you look very carefully, that there's a very subtle red hint around the hair. I did that because the background is obviously very, very red. So I just put a very subtle red hint around the hair, and it's technically around the body, but you don't see it as prominently as you do the hair because her hair is white. I put that red hint to kind of indicate that there's this intense red light behind her that's kind of enveloping around the hair, so you get that red glow. There's also obviously the color grading that I've done to the scene. There it is, the Lumetri. So you can see this is what she would look like normally, but then I've warmed her skin tone up. I've added a bit of that red because, again, she's clearly in a room full of red, so the red would naturally be lighting her as well. One thing to kind of keep in mind here, though, is I haven't mentioned it to this point, but when you are editing something, the order of operations is very important. So you can see, if you follow my mouse, the chroma key or the green screen effect has to be up top, because that's the first effect you want to apply. And then you come down. The edge composite is that red that I'm talking about around her body. And then the Lumetri is the color grading. If I did it the other way around, if I color graded her first and then tried to green screen it, I would run into all kinds of issues, because I would now be trying to green screen something that I've altered the color of. So the order of operations when it comes to your effects matters. It matters for video and it matters for audio. Always keep that in mind. It's very, very important. You can sometimes run into very weird situations if you get the order messed up. You can even run into weird situations where if the order changes from one portion to the other portion of a video. So always try to keep that in mind. Order of operations really matters. But for this one, it was really just about nailing that green screen. Thankfully, GB followed my suggestion. She kept her hair down. That really, really helps. Have, again, long hair, curly hair, you're really going to run into some trouble, unfortunately. I was able to get a really, really nice key with the Chroma Key Studio. I applied that red accent, and then I applied the red accent to the rest of her character to try to make it blend as much as I could with the scene. There are, of course, further steps I could go. There have been things I've been dabbling in with using actual lighting sources, with using overlay sheets or filters to kind of add additional blending. Hopefully that's something that I will be utilizing more, but each step one takes time and it takes practice. It takes a lot of practice. If I was doing an older green screen video, like I said in the past, I've used DaVinci Resolve. The one thing about Resolve is that it's a very, very good keyer if you have kind of more troublesome keys, because the keying software in Resolve is very gentle. And that's not to say that it won't grab a lot of green color, but it's just when it interacts with stuff like hair and whatnot, it's a very, very gentle green screen tool. So I have used Resolve in the past, but I was really, really satisfied with how this one came out. I was really happy. Hopefully, to the few people who appreciate the green screening that goes on in these, I hope you also really enjoyed this one, because I was really, really happy with how this turned out. But this was, like I said, one of the tougher ones that I've done recently, but really happy with it. I thought you might enjoy kind of seeing what this looks like normally, and then kind of that quick little TLDR of the process of chroma keying it, and we had the triplet video, we had the normal kind of standard GB ASMR video, and then I thought I'd throw the Daisy one in because, let's be honest, everyone loves seeing Daisy. So I don't know how long this is going to end up being. I've been recording for what feels like 300 hours, and I have given the most abridged version of this possible to try to get through as much as I can. But really, like I said, the TLDR is she sends the files, and I start with Audition to bring the files together. I go into iZotope to clean up the files and do kind of a general pass to bring them to a working position. I bring that all into Premiere. I go through the video one time, focusing mostly on the audio, and I'm taking out all the popping, the bad bits, the things we don't want. I'm applying effects as I go. I'm doing as much as I can to the audio in that pass. Loop back around. I'll do a video pass. Do I have to do green screen? Do I have to do color grading? Do I have to do other video effects? All of that will happen usually during the second pass. I'll go through that. I'll finalize all that. I'll add the outro card. I will add, if there's an ad, if it's a Saturday ad video, I'll have done the ad way in advance, usually several days in advance. I'll add the ad in right at the very end. If there's anything else, throw that on there, hit render, again, 1080p, 60 FPS, throw it up on YouTube. There we go. So I know this was a bit of a weird video. I've been talking a lot, and I hope you enjoyed. I hope that was this ASMR. I tried. I've been trying to stay calm, but as the more I've gone on, I definitely feel like I've been louder. I'm gonna be editing this, so maybe I'll just bring myself down. But I hope you enjoyed this abridged look at going through a video and kind of seeing a little bit of the behind the scenes of a couple of the videos that I thought were more recent and more interesting ones. If you like it, make sure to kind of let me know down below, because it has been a very long time since I've made any sort of video content. So this is the first video that I've really kind of self-produced in probably close to 7 or 8 years. So thumbs up, please. But yeah, thank you for watching, and we'll see everyone, I guess, on the next GB video on Saturday.